My name is Isabella, and I never thought a cup of coffee could burn more than just skin. That morning, the kitchen smelled of toasted sourdough and hazelnut roast. The light came in softly through the window above the sink, catching on the dust in the air like it always did in my daughter's house. I was in my usual spot at the end of the breakfast table, holding a fresh mug with both hands. I thought it would be a quiet day. Melissa had made the coffee strong, just how her husband liked it, even though he was out of town for the week. Jordan, my grandson, shuffled into the room in his hoodie, half awake and already scrolling on his phone. He sat across from me, legs stretched too far under the table, and said it so casually I almost didn't hear it the first time. "Can I borrow your credit card again? There's this thing I need for my gaming setup. It's only $3,000. My fingers tightened around the mug before I even answered. No, I said, not sharp, just final. I didn't expect a thank you, but I also didn't expect what came next. Melissa didn't scream. She didn't slam a door or raise her voice. She just went still, her lips pressed into a thin line. The quiet spread out like a thick fog. I could hear the tick of the wall clock, the soft whir of the fridge, even the creak of my own breathing. She didn't speak. Instead, she stepped forward, grabbed the mug from my hands, and poured the scalding contents straight into my lap. I gasped before the heat could register, before my brain caught up to my body. I lurched back, the mug hitting the floor and cracking clean in half. The coffee soaked into my pajama pants, already clinging to my thighs like fire. I stood up, trembling, the pain hitting all at once. She didn't flinch. She crossed her arms like she was giving a presentation. "If you're going to be selfish, then maybe it's time you leave. Either give Jordan what he needs, or you find somewhere else to live. We're not running a charity." That word, charity, it slapped harder than the burn. I blinked at her, struggling to understand if I'd heard her right. I opened my mouth, then closed it again. Jordan hadn't moved. He was still scrolling, as if nothing had happened. My legs stung. My hands shook. The heat was spreading, and no one made a move to help me. Not even to hand me a towel. "I've been covering the electric bill," I said softly, not to plead, but to remind, "and I never asked you to pay for my prescriptions." Melissa rolled her eyes. "You're lucky I let you stay here at all. After your surgery, you couldn't even walk. I managed your whole life while you healed." My heart thudded against my ribs. It wasn't cared for. It never was. It was control. And I had let her. In that moment, standing in my daughter's kitchen, wet and burned and alone, I realized something I'd been trying not to see. She didn't see me as her mother. She saw me as a problem. A stubborn old woman who had outlived her usefulness. The look in her eyes wasn't regret. It was a calculation. She was weighing her options, and I was the inconvenience in them. My voice came out low and unsteady. $3,000? For what? A light-up chair. She shrugged. "It's not a big deal. You have the money. You've had it since Dad died. Why are you being so difficult?" "Because it's mine," I wanted to say. "Because I worked for it. Because I gave you everything when you had nothing." Instead, I stood there dripping, while the smell of burned coffee filled the air. I dabbed my lap with a paper towel. My dignity felt smaller than the shattered mug on the floor. Melissa folded her arms again, the stance of someone who thinks they've won. "You have until the end of the day. Give him the card, or pack your things. Your choice." I didn't answer. Not yet. But something inside me shifted, not with anger, with clarity. They weren't helping me, they were managing me. And I was done being managed. I made it to my room without saying a word. The coffee had cooled against my skin, but the sting stayed. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, just breathing. The silence in that room felt different now. Not quiet. Hollow. I reached for my purse without thinking, needing something normal to focus on. My hands moved through the pockets, fingers brushing lip balm, old tissues, a worn prayer card, but no wallet, no ID, no bank card. I checked again, slower this time, heart knocking in my chest. I dumped everything onto the bed. Nothing. It was gone. Everything tied to my name had vanished from the place I thought was safe. A memory surfaced. Faint, but now sharp. The day Melissa offered to handle my prescriptions. "Just until you're steady on your feet," she said. I was groggy from surgery, grateful not to think. I said, yes. Then it was the phone calls. The bridge club called twice, but Melissa told them I was too tired to talk. Then it was the mail. She'd collect it before I got downstairs, said she'd sort the junk and save me time. I hadn't seen a bank statement in months. Melissa moved everything to online access. Set up paperless billing, said it was more modern, said I didn't need to worry about anything, she'd take care of it. I left her. I told myself it was love. I was lucky to have a daughter who cared. When the pharmacy switched systems and required a new insurance card, I never even saw the letter. She handled it. Always. I hadn't realized the walls were closing in because they didn't slam shut. They whispered shut. One click at a time. When I stopped seeing my neighbour, Dottie, for coffee, I thought it was the weather. But now I remembered that Melissa had stopped telling me when she came by. I thought I was just too tired to reach out. No, I was being trimmed back, neatened, reduced. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking at the empty bag in my lap. Not just empty of things. Empty of access. Empty of proof that I was still me. And for the first time, I knew this wasn't forgetfulness or oversight. It was precision. This had been planned. Not in malice, maybe, but in control. And I had let her do it, piece by piece. I didn't cry. I didn't shout or break anything. I sat there on the bed for a few minutes, holding that empty purse, and then I stood up. My knees ached, as they always did in the morning, but I moved slowly toward the closet. I knew what I had to do. The suitcase was still on the top shelf. It hadn't been used since my surgery, but it was clean and intact. I reached for it, gripping the shelf edge for balance. My hip complained, but I didn't groan. Pain was something I knew. Betrayal was new. I started with the drawer where I kept my nightgowns and old photos. Folded the clothes tightly, efficiently. This wasn't panic packing, it was methodical. I folded a warm sweater Cliff gave me before he passed, one I hadn't worn in a year. Then I pulled out the second drawer. Underneath some winter socks was a yellow notebook. I opened it to the back pages, fingers trembling slightly. I'd written down my banking info months ago, just in case. I didn't know why then. Now I did. The handwriting was shaky, but mine. That mattered more than I realized. It was proof of self. A breadcrumb to follow out of the woods. I picked up my phone. The screen lit up with Melissa's name in the favourites list. I scrolled past it. Found Richard's number. He answered on the second ring. I told him I needed a ride. He didn't ask questions, just said he'd be there in 20 minutes. By the time I zipped the suitcase, the house was still quiet. Jordan's music was thumping faintly upstairs. No one had come to check on me. No footsteps. No apology. I pulled on my coat, slipped the notebook into the inside pocket, and took one last look around the room. The framed photo on the nightstand was turned slightly. I straightened it, then turned it face down. When the doorbell rang, I opened it before it could chime twice. Richard stood there in his navy windbreaker, holding a canvas tote. He didn't say much, just looked me in the eye. "You ready?" he asked. I nodded, not because I felt brave, but because I finally knew I didn't need permission to leave. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not the kind that hums with tension or hides sharp words under its surface. This was really quiet. Birds in the distance, the soft rustle of trees, the occasional footstep on gravel. The kind of silence you can breathe in. The senior community wasn't fancy, but it was cared for. Fresh flowers in pots, walkways swept clean, windows that opened all the way. Richard walked beside me as I checked in, letting me move at my own pace. No rush, no pressure, just space. The room they gave me had a window that faced a small koi pond. I stood there for a while, watching the fish drift without direction. For the first time in weeks, I felt something like calm. It didn't erase the pain, but it let me sit beside it. That afternoon, Richard sat up at the kitchen table with a folder of forms. He spoke plainly, gently. First, we called my bank. Froze every account with my name. I answered security questions, gave my old routing number, and verified the email I used before Melissa changed it. The man on the phone paused when I mentioned possible unauthorized access. He said he would escalate it. Next was the trust. Richard explained it slowly. A protective legal boundary, one Melissa couldn't cross. It would hold any assets I still had left. My social security payments, my insurance. If I regained access to the house, it would go there too. I blinked. The house? I thought it had been transferred. Richard raised an eyebrow. Not unless you signed a full transfer with power of attorney. Did you? I shook my head. Melissa had said something about paperwork during my hospital stay, helping with insurance forms, she called it. I remembered signing one page, maybe two. I hadn't read them. I was recovering, tired, trusting. But I never signed over full ownership. That, I knew. Richard pulled out his tablet, checked the public deed registry. His eyes scanned the page, and then he smiled. It's still in your name. I stared at him. My name, not hers, mine. That simple fact hit harder than I expected. It meant I hadn't lost everything. It meant Melissa had been operating on assumption, not authority. And I had the right to take it back. We made a list. Paperwork to file, notarizations to schedule. He connected me with a financial protection advocate, someone who specialized in elder abuse cases. She would walk me through the rest. I didn't feel strong, not yet, but I felt aligned, like the world had stopped spinning sideways and I could finally stand up straight. That night, I stood at the window again. The pond shimmered in the moonlight, and the room behind me smelled faintly of lemon balm and fresh sheets. I wasn't healed, but I was safe, and that was enough to begin. The papers were crisp when I signed them. The ink settled clean into the signature line. No hesitation. The real estate agent, a calm woman named Carla, flipped to the next page without commentary. She understood. Discretion was part of the service. We scheduled the walkthrough for Tuesday. I didn't need to be there, that was the point. The house might have had Melissa's furniture and Jordan's sneakers by the door, but legally it was mine, always had been. By the time Carla stepped into the front yard with her clipboard, Melissa was pulling into the driveway. The timing wasn't intentional, but it was perfect. Melissa got out of the car fast, no hesitation, just fury. She marched across the lawn like it was a battlefield. Carla kept her cool. She explained plainly that the owner had requested an evaluation for potential listing. Melissa's face drained of colour, then filled with it again. She pointed, she paced, she accused. Carla remained professional. Took notes, kept her distance. I wasn't there to see it. I was 3 towns over, sitting on a sunlit balcony with a cup of chamomile in my hand. The breeze was gentle. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. 4 missed calls. Then 5. I answered on the 6th. Melissa's voice came in hot and sharp. There's a realtor here. At my house. What is going on? I let a pause stretch between us. Just long enough to feel the shift. Then I said, calm as the wind around me. You told me to leave. Now I'm doing just that, she sputtered. I could hear her walking, hear the door slam behind her. You're trying to embarrass me. Is that it? No. I'm reclaiming what's mine. You can't just throw us out. I didn't. You told me to go, so I went. She fell silent, the kind of silence that sounds like a clock stopping. I could almost hear her realizing she'd said the wrong thing to the wrong woman on the wrong day. I ended the call without another word. Carla texted a few minutes later. Property assessed. Melissa attempted to interfere. All documented. I leaned back in my chair and stared out at the sky. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even satisfaction. It was gravity. Things were returning to where they belonged. The house wasn't my prize. It wasn't even my home anymore. But it was proof that Melissa's control had limits, that her grip, no matter how tight, had cracks. And I had found one. Later that evening, Richard stopped by with lemon cake and a fresh copy of the trust papers. We reviewed the timeline, set plans in motion. We didn't talk about Melissa. We didn't need to. She had told me to leave. And I had finally listened. Not in anger, in power. It was a Tuesday morning when they came. I was in the sunroom of the senior community, reading a paperback I'd borrowed from the library shelf. The light was soft through the windows, and my tea was still warm. I saw them before the front desk even called my room. Melissa, in a red blouse too tight for comfort, was walking fast and sharp. Jordan slouched beside her, hands stuffed in his hoodie, headphones hanging from his neck like they were part of him. They didn't look lost. They looked entitled. The receptionist called quietly, asking if I wanted to greet them. I said no, but you can let them know I'm watching. No explanation needed. The staff here had seen it before. The late apologies, the guilt trips, the sudden performances once money or control slipped away. I moved to the far corner of the room, just behind the tinted glass that looked out into the lobby. From there, I could see them without being seen. Melissa gestured toward the desk. Her mouth moved too fast, hands slicing the air. Jordan stared at the ceiling like he was waiting for something to start. When the receptionist gently pointed toward the guest policy sign, Melissa's face tightened. She turned in a slow circle, scanning the room. Her eyes passed over me, then back again, not realizing what the glass was hiding. I didn't flinch. I didn't blink. I sat with my hands folded, watching her like a painting. Then Jordan spotted me. Our eyes locked. He didn't look ashamed. He looked scared. Not of me, of what he had lost. The gravy train had derailed. A moment later, a security guard stepped in from the hallway. Not loud, not aggressive, just present. Melissa's voice rose. I couldn't hear the words, but I recognized the pattern. Desperation, with a coat of outrage. Jordan said something low and fast. Melissa whipped around to him, but he was already walking toward the door. For once, he led the way out. She followed, stiff, trembling with anger. She couldn't spend any more. The doors slid closed behind them. The lock clicked back into place. That afternoon, I found a letter in my mailbox. Cream envelope. No return address. But the handwriting was hers. Flawless. Familiar. Like she was still pretending everything hadn't burned down. I took it upstairs. Didn't open it right away. Let it sit beside my tea while I finished a crossword. Then I slid my finger under the seal and unfolded the letter. It began with Mum. Not dear Mum, just Mum. Like nothing had changed. The first paragraph tried. She said things had gotten out of hand, that she never meant for it to feel like I wasn't wanted, that we'd misunderstood each other. By the third line, she'd shifted. Bills were piling up. Jordan didn't qualify for a loan. They were struggling. Could we talk? Could I help? I didn't read the rest. My hand slid inside the envelope and pulled out a check. It was written from an old joint account, torn at the edge. My name is printed on it. The amount, $3,500. In the memo, car repairs. I hadn't written it. I never authorized it. I didn't even need to. The check itself was enough. I folded it twice, then again, until it was small and square. Then I walked it straight to the shredder in the office across the hall. No tears, no hesitation, just quiet whirring until it was gone. The envelope I left open on my desk, let it sit there, exposed. A reminder. Not of pain, but of power. I didn't need to answer, not with words. Because silence, when chosen, is not surrender, it's sovereignty, and this time it was mine. The folder sat heavy in my lap as Richard and I waited in the small meeting room. Across the table, a woman from the Elder Protection Unit glanced through each page with practiced calm. She took notes, asked questions gently, and paused only once when she came across the forged check I'd shredded but copied. I handed over my journal, the one with dates, amounts, and names. She didn't smile, but she nodded. That meant more. It wasn't rage that brought me there. It wasn't about revenge. It was about the record. I wanted someone, somewhere, to know what had happened. That it wasn't a misunderstanding. That it had a name. Financial abuse. Elder fraud. Words that sounded like headlines until they were written in your handwriting. By the time we left, the wheels were already turning. Melissa and Jordan's actions were now part of a formal review. They would be questioned, perhaps more. But I wasn't the one pushing it. I had simply told the truth. With paperwork, with clarity. Back at Golden Pines, I returned to a different kind of quiet, one not made of fear, but of ease. I took my tea to the courtyard most afternoons, sat on the same bench near the hydrangeas. Sometimes Marjorie joined me, sometimes not. We didn't always talk. We didn't have to. There was no one managing my prescriptions anymore. I picked them up myself. I scheduled my own appointments. I kept my banking analogue with printed copies just the way I liked it. The staff knew I had been through something, but they never pried. They just made sure the doors locked, the coffee stayed warm, and the garden stayed blooming. Richard visited often, not as a lawyer, as a friend. We played cards on weekends. He always let me win the second round, said the first was for skill, the second for story. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit by the window with a notepad and write down anything that felt unfinished. But lately the pages stayed mostly blank. Not because there was nothing to say, but because there was nothing left to carry. I didn't check Melissa's social media. I didn't track the investigation. I had given them what they needed. And that was enough. Whether they faced charges or not, I knew one thing for sure. They no longer had access. Not to my name, not to my account, not to me. One afternoon, I pulled out my old journal. The same one that had once been filled with panic notes and transaction lists. Now it felt like a case closed. I flipped to the last page, wrote a single line. When they came with fury, I stayed with peace. I tore it out, slid it into a small frame, and placed it beside my bed. A reminder, not one of them, but of me. Because I didn't just leave. I ended the cycle. The one where silence meant surrender. Where aging meant invisibility. Where love came with strings that tightened until you couldn't breathe. I chose a different ending. One where kindness had boundaries, where forgiveness didn't mean forgetting, and where peace wasn't the absence of conflict, but the refusal to let it define you. Later that evening, I walked to the koi pond. The fish glided under the surface like they had nowhere to be. I sat on the same bench as always and let the breeze lift the edge of my sleeve. Marjorie joined me, carrying 2 lemon cookies and a folded crossword. She didn't ask anything, just handed me the pencil. We sat there, the two of us, women who had lived long enough to know the cost of silence and the value of knowing when not to speak. A few weeks later, I got a letter, not from Melissa, from the investigator. She thanked me for my thoroughness, said cases like mine helped shape better protections. That mattered too. Maybe some other woman, sitting at her daughter's kitchen table with coffee in her lap, would one day find the strength to leave. Not loud, not vengeful, just whole. That night, I opened the window before bed. The breeze was soft, carrying the scent of lavender from the courtyard. I lay back, hands folded, eyes open. Not waiting, just present, safe, free.